So you remember about... Lovely. Oops. Okay, thank you very much for coming, everybody. Beautiful night outside. I will now wish it was raining like yesterday, and it's got a few more people in. But thank you very much indeed to people who turned up in the room. We've also got some people online as well. Just to remind the people online, if you could please stay muted. That would be good. And also that if you would like to put any comments or points or questions, please put them in the chat. You can start that any time, right from the very beginning if you want to. So, for those of you who've not been to the Café Scientifique before, the format is very simple. We have a short talk, we have a break, where you can go and get some more snacks and drinks, not very long, a few minutes, and then we start a discussion. It's an opportunity for you to ask the speaker to expand on something that they've talked about, if you wish to, or bring up something related to it. Do bear in mind, not everyone has all the answers, but that's probably a good thing as well. I don't know, John might prove me wrong on that one. The whole of this talk gets recorded, not the comments in the chat, but the rest of it does. So if you're feeling terrifically shy, please grab mine or Zoe's attention, and one of us will come and ask a question for you. But it's much better if the audience do. You will notice, for those in the room, that the microphone is a directional one. If you're old-fashioned, you can't do that, it doesn't work. You have to have it pointing at your mouth, actually at your mouth, like a pop star, and then it works absolutely fine. So we'll make sure that we've got the handle set up so that can happen. So just give me a moment, grab my eyes, I'll be looking around the room and catch my attention, and I can bring you the mic and you can say whatever you want to. The talk's pretty short. Obviously, if you can't see the slides, although I know I brought the lights down, if you've got the Zoom link, you can also look in on your phone as well, if that's easier. So, I'd like to introduce John Sutton, who I've known for far too long. I'm taking advantage of the fact he's visiting Oxford anyway. He actually studied classics here, and after that particularly misbegotten youth, decided to move into philosophy, which is part of the course in classics here anyway, and went to go and do his doctorate in Australia, and then stayed on there, so he hasn't until this year, or last year, started coming back very often, and was a professor of both philosophy and cognitive science at Macquarie University. At the moment he's on a Lever Hume visiting fellowship from University of Stirling, which actually allows him to go out and do talks like this. So I'm delighted. Thank you very much, Lever Hume. It's very kind of you. And that's helped him to come and stay in Oxford for a couple of extra days. So without more ado, over to you.
Many thanks, Rachel. Can you hear me? Good. Thank you all so much for coming out this evening. Yes, it's my first night back in Oxford, first night here for a little while, and I would probably not have chosen to come here and talk myself, so I'm really grateful to you. I am aiming to speak for about 25, 28 minutes tonight, and I've got a couple of questions or themes that I will leave you with as we go along. So our topic is collaborative cognition, but I'm using cognition, that word, which is a puzzle kind of technical word in a very broad sense. It's not excluding emotion, it's not just thinking, it includes feeling and the emotional life. So I want to start with just giving you a scare. If I was to ask you now to please form into, say, 5 groups of 3 or 3 groups of 5, how would you feel? Many of us in working life and going back to school years have been encouraged to get into groups and let's do some group work, we are told. And even recently when up at Stirling I was given a chance to speak to graduate students about the perils and the pitfalls of teamwork in interdisciplinary research. The way that they actually advertised my talk was to say teamwork is dream work. So I guess my topic tonight is, well, is that true, and under what conditions might it be true? As we know, there are many cases in which people can know each other really well and not work effectively together. There's no magic bullet in collaboration. So what I'm interested in before I start telling you about my research is just to have you reflect for a minute about, of all of the many more or less intelligent things that you do, and I don't mean philosophical things, but things where you have to make decisions, to think, to use your beliefs and your knowledge to remember the past, but also to regulate your emotions and your feelings. Which of those things do you like to do together with other people? It might be with work colleagues, with your partner, with your family, and which do you prefer to do alone? Some things can be done alone and together. Some things are more fun when you do them together, but in many cases, Rachel, we've got a little.
Just press OK.
Let me just.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's being careful.
Yes.
Being careful, that's absolutely fine.
Very good. In many cases, it might be more fun to do things together. So just have that in the back of your mind as we go forward. Now, it sometimes does work really well to do things with other people. Though I'm not going to be talking about it a lot tonight, we also, as well as memory, my main topic, we also do study collaboration in the arts and in performance and in expert skills. So we know that often musicians can do extraordinary things by working together in both classical and contemporary music. Of course, there are great solo songwriters and performers, but many forms of music have to be done collaboratively. Likewise in dance, likewise in theatre and performance, collaboration is one of the joys of seeing people work together. And in the crafts, the more technical and skillful aspects of design, both in more traditional crafts and in contemporary crafts, where the design process may use all kinds of technical skills and digital systems, again, we can do many things together that we couldn't do alone. Sometimes it's incredibly hard to work well with other people. The challenges may be extreme, the task domain may be really difficult. One thing that's going to become very relevant as the Trump trial progresses is the challenging difficulty of working together for jurors in a trial situation. There are often outliers in a group of this size, of 12 people or so. This is a cognitive task par excellence to winnow evidence and to come up with a decision. Each individual has to do it herself or himself, but then the collective, the group, has to make a decision together. In other contexts, the difficulty is more like life and death. You can be working together in ways that you actually rely on another person for your safety, and you can cause trouble, death, injury for other people. In some cases, it's also quite common for failure to happen. I guess we study this especially in elite sport. Here's one example for those of you involved in water activities. Like this is a famous case which an Australian rower just lay down, getting the lifelong nickname of Lay Down Sally under stress in a competitive scenario. But we're all familiar with cases in which we or one other person, in a sense, lets down the team. That's one of the great challenges of collaboration. I'll start with, before we get on to memory, with just one other domain. So I've mentioned cases of creativity, I've mentioned cases of emotion regulation. These are things that we do together a lot. But I'm interested now, I'm working on spatial cognition and navigation. This came up maybe because we had the luck to live for a year in Paris, but we can see it in Edinburgh. I'm not sure if Oxford is quite big enough to get this as much as you can, but do you often see couples or other small groups together looking at their phone, they're obviously looking at the map, and they're fighting with each other? They're going, no, we shouldn't go that way like it says here, we should take this other route. So the technology doesn't actually solve the problem, it's not the end. And so this makes it absolutely absurd that a lot of neuroscience and psychology, looking at humans' ability to navigate, why do we get lost, how do we find our way, studies people individually by putting them into a scanner and working out which parts of the brain are active. Perfectly useful thing to do, but in the real world, wayfinding is often collaborative. We are doing it together with each other. We are constantly trying to use and understand and make decisions on the basis of maps. We're making plans together for which route should we take. And this happens with technologies too, in cars or on the streets. It's difficult to interpret a lot of our new wayfinding and navigation technologies. And as I said, we often fight with each other. And sometimes you can, do the best you can, and you go to the wrong part of town, and you have to live with the consequences for many years. You want to go different directions. And as a result, sometimes of the conflict, we fail sometimes to get ourselves to the right place. So I'm interested in any examples you've got or particular features of your experience about collaborating with other people to find your way around the world. This is something I'm trying to design some experiments about for the future. But let's come to my main topic tonight, memory. Collaborative recall or shared remembering. I do think the principles involved in memory are kind of similar, if not the same, as in some of these other domains. So this is just the only bit of sort of advertising. This is our edited book on collaborative remembering, an Oxford University Press book that came out in 2018, Collaborative Remembering. This is a book on collaborative embodied performance, looking at skill and the performing arts, which I edited with my researcher and mountain biking colleague, Kath Bicknell, that came out a couple of years ago. So I'm going to be focusing on memory tonight, but very happy to take questions on collaboration and teamwork in other domains as well. So the next question is, just again before I present research on this, to ask you to think about your own lives. When do you work with other people to remember something? What are the, see people look at each other, and so what are the contexts? So sometimes it might be that you might be in a trivia competition, or you're doing a crossword puzzle, right? So you're often remembering facts together. Sometimes it's useful to have one of your friends or family with you when you're trying to remember facts. Often we're trying to remember together how to do something, might be how to mend a piece of equipment or how to use a particular technical system. So those are kind of, if you like semantic memory, factual memory, memory for facts, and remembering how to do things, remembering procedures. But I guess what I'm most interested in, what this talk's going to concentrate on, is remembering the past together. I guess this is the classic form of memory, which is directed at our past, our personal history. So just again, think for yourselves about what are the contexts, who do you do this with? With family members, with friends, with work colleagues, and why do you do it when you do it? Sometimes it may be deliberate. You might be sitting down for a chat and say, I haven't seen you for ages, let's chat about old times. But I think more often it just happens incidentally. It's part of other conversations. You're sitting around the dinner table or having a coffee at work, and somebody says, remember that time when so-and-so did that? Were you there? Yes, I was there. That was a crazy experience. So, why do we do it, and what's it like? So, I'm going to use this phrase collaborative recall as a sort of semi-technical term. I hope it's obvious what it means, recalling the past together, or shared remembering. And what's interesting about this as a topic for research is that for nearly 30 years now, there have been robust experimental traditions in cognitive psychology and in social psychology for studying this, which I'm going to briefly explain. As Rachel said, my background after my classics degree was in philosophy, so I'm going to give you a little bit of the philosophical input, the theoretical input to the experimental work that we've done. But I've been lucky enough to do this work with psychological colleagues, mainly at Macquarie University. We've all scattered a bit now, mainly with Celia Harris and Amanda Barney, who are the co-authors and leaders of a lot of the work that I'm working with, and then with a couple of generations of students and postdocs too. I'm going to give you a couple of examples of the kind of thing I mean, and what I'm hoping to convince you is that this kind of thing is really common, really normal. This is a context in which we're asking older couples to tell us about their honeymoon. This is 40 years or more ago. These are people in their 70s. This couple are jointly discussing their honeymoon 44 years ago. They're talking with each other about the past. We went to a show, can you remember what they were called? We went to two shows, sorry, what were they called? We did. One was a musical, or were they both? I don't. No, he's saying he can't remember. The wife says, John Hanson was in it. And the husband at that moment, he gets it. Desert Song. Desert Song. That's the name of the musical. I couldn't remember what it was called, but yes, I knew Hanson was in it. Yes. So this is not magic. Like, the information was there, at least in the husband's brain, presumably. But it's quite plausible that it wouldn't have come out at all if it wasn't for having this context, a conversation with his wife, the person who was there 40 or more years ago. So we call this cross-cueing, when people are working together to remember events in the past that perhaps they experienced together, they had shared experiences. Here's a kind of simpler example from much younger people. These are two sisters from the Netherlands. They were studying in Australia, and the task they were doing is to remember as many names of family members as they possibly could. I'll just go through this very quickly. So the one sister, A, says, what's the other one's name? Oma's sister. B just laughs. The big sister says, dude, that's no help. B just laughs. Okay, that's not, I forget what her name is. She was really nice. She's really trying here to get this going. The one who lived in the squishy apartment. Squishy apartment? Did you go to her house? She lives in Harlem. Ah, she has a small little apartment. And so what's striking about this case, why we use this, is that B, the sister who's contributed absolutely nothing to this exchange, she's the one who suddenly gets it. yeah, Tata, Tinnican. And that's it. So this is a peculiar kind of interaction where the heavy lifting of the collaboration was done by Sister A, but she couldn't get it on her own. It's the other sister who just comes in, sort of parachutes in and gets the answer at the end. So people talk about shared experiences all the time, not just in formal contexts or around the family dinner table, but just in the middle of doing other things, for many reasons, often just because it's fun. We're interested in cases at the stronger end of the spectrum, when there are people who've known each other for a long time. Dyads is our technical term for groups of two, couples especially, older couples especially, who know each other through and through. But there can be other small groups too, work groups, colleagues, friends who have a shared history, people who did some theatre together 40 years ago and have a lot of experiences together as a result. There's one technical label in the psychological literature for this kind of group memory, transactive memory system. Again, this is not a magical or a mystical process. It's very ordinary people talking about ordinary events and experiences they've had. Wegner's notion of a transactive memory system occurs when there are two memories connect together appropriately. And when we as researchers consider the memories of two or more people, consider them as a combined system. What can they do together that they couldn't do alone? So that's the sort of driving point for this research. And we're trying to understand then, well, does it help? Is it good? Is it useful? Is it just fun, or is there any kind of cognitive advantage to remembering the past together? It's natural to expect benefits. But here is the experimental paradigm that suggests things are not so simple. So I'll just take a minute to explain what's happening here. It's a very simple experimental paradigm. We're not going to spend too long on it. At the beginning, two groups of three individuals, I for individual, they might learn some stuff, or they might talk about some stuff and recall it themselves. That's recall one. At the second stage, we put three of them together. This is a collaborating group, a small group of three, C for collaborators, and we ask them to remember this material together. We see what happens. We might record what they say, but we're interested in their output. Are they accurate? How much do they remember? But then we leave another group of three separate. So they're not really a group. We call them a nominal group, a group in name alone, because what we're going to do is tot up the output that this group comes up with and treat it as if it was a group. Because we're comparing that to the number of three, the same number of people, three who were working together and three people who were working separately. Later we can have another gap and we can see what happens to the group who were collaborating when they later remember the experiences later. So what difference does collaboration make later? This is very simple. This is a kind of caricature of the standard result, very robust results that we find in many contexts. The first bit of news is good news, that the collaborating group in the middle here typically remembers much more than the average individual does. Individuals will remember much less. This is not surprising because this is one individual compared to three in the collaborating group. So yes, it's better to get three people to do a job than one person to do a job. But that's too low a threshold. That doesn't prove collaboration is actually much use at all. The key comparison is between the group of three working together and the three people who were working separately. And we then pool what they did, we pool what they remembered, and we compare that to the collaborating group. And this result is called collaborative inhibition. Collaboration does not produce the same result, produces a worse result than a nominal group of people working separately. So collaborating groups, the message is, do not perform up to their potential. They're losing something in the process by collaborating. That's the mystery. It's a robust effect. You might think, well, you just need to make the people in the group work harder. But no, you can offer them decent monetary rewards and tell them, if you're the best group, we'll buy you a dinner, we'll give you a bunch of money. Doesn't help. It's a deeper problem than that. It's actually really hard for the group to work well. It's not just motivation. It's not just that they don't care. So the standard explanation is that what happens when you're working together in a group, remembering some complex material, is that your own individual processes are disrupted. You're listening to other people. You're getting disturbed. You're interfered with. Your cognitive processes can't go through their normal, easy processes to remember material because you're monitoring other people. Your retrieval is disrupted. This has really important applied consequences, especially I'll just mention them in the law. It's a justification for many jurisdictions, including in this country. Witnesses to an event, people who've seen a crime or an accident on the street, are not allowed to confer with each other, to collaborate, before they give evidence in court as individuals. And so the worry is that they would contaminate or interfere with each other's information, with each other's memories. So you might get people coming up with the same story, which wasn't exactly what each of them experienced. There's a lot of controversy about whether police officers should also be banned from collaborating together. At the moment in this country, they are typically allowed to come up with a story together before the police officers appear in court. Most psychologists think that's not a good idea. The same principle should be applied to them. But you can see that the collaborative inhibition result I mentioned is a sort of justification for this, because misinformation can arise from other people having an input. Working together with other people can make memory worse than if you were remembering alone. So this is the famous American psychologist Elizabeth Loftus, who's done terrific work on false memories, the possibility that you can be encouraged to believe something, perhaps by a police officer or some other authority, that didn't actually happen. You can be completely sincere, but wrong. Now, Loftus's work has taken her in some interesting directions in recent times. She has, for instance, appeared in a number of high-profile defense cases, for example, defending Harvey Weinstein, where the idea is she's arguing that we can't be sure to believe in the evidence provided by the memories of individual witnesses who've been contaminated by other people, who may have spoken to others who have been abused by the same person, perhaps, because they haven't retained their individual memory, shielded in their own brains. We should be skeptical about their own memories. So I think that's a slightly dangerous outcome. So we've been trying to push back against this idea that collaborating is bad, to put it bluntly. And we're motivated by a different way of understanding how people work together. We can use this label cognitive ecologies. And I guess this is the theoretical background. It's to reject the idea that what the mind is individuals thinking on their own, as if that was all that philosophy or mental life is. So we've been motivated by theory that's kind of changing the cognitive sciences and psychology from the inside to be less individualistic, to worry less about what's happening in the individual brain. Of course, that's crucial, that's a key part of the process, but to look at what's happening out in the world, in the social world and the technical world. So in this view, cognition is partly in the body, it's embedded in our systems, in our technologies, in our cultures. It's active and inactive, and it's extended sometimes into our objects, our artifacts, and our environments. So this reaction to individualism has some effect on this particular research program on collaborative recall. So we've been trying to implement that. The idea is that sometimes remembering is something that genuinely happens not just in my brain, but across a small group of people, perhaps across a couple or a family. So we're asking, where is my mind? Not necessarily inside the skull. So to come back to the experimental paradigm, what we've been trying to do is tweak that experiment, the basic design that I just described, to make more interesting groups who are real-life groups who know each other, to find material that they care about, instead of remembering, for example, lists of words or numerals, and to do real interaction between the group when they're working together. So we're trying to complicate the results in this experimental paradigm. And what we focus on, what I'm going to focus on for the rest of the talk, is shared histories and microprocesses. So this is why we found older couples to be the most interesting group for us to study. People who have had a long history of knowing each other deeply, who've divided labor between each other. And it's not just cognitive emotion, it's emotion as well as cognition that they know each other in. This is just a typical pattern of results that there's a huge amount of differences. Some couples do much better working together, other couples do much worse. And the comparison here is what they do on their own as individuals. So there's a lot of variation. For some couples, it helps them to collaborate. For other couples, it really is a bad thing. I'm going to give you an example of how this works in practice. The task here is that our older couples were asked, tell me as many names as you can of the people in the club that you both belong to. So first, 1 week, we would ask them individually. And here's an example. The woman gives this whole list of names. The man separately, this separate interview, gives a whole list of names. And we get the result that the two of them individually come up with 17 when we pool their results. So that's 17 names of individual recall. When they work together the following week, they interact, they cross-cue in the way that was familiar from the other examples I give. David and Alison Beard, the woman and the man, work together, and they each contribute a little bit, talking over each other in ways that are very familiar when you both know the names of people. And we see in this case that on their own, the two of them could come up with only a total of 17. Here in collaborative recall, they come up with 30, so significantly higher, significant benefit from collaboration. Contrast another couple, they actually remembered more, they were more centrally involved in this club, but it was much worse when they were collaborating. And here's why. When they were collaborating, the man started by going, there's Andy, there's Brian, there's Colin, there's Donald. He's working through their names alphabetically. The woman goes, well, at the back of the room when we meet, there's so-and-so, then next to him there's so-and-so, and so she was working around the room in a physical, spatial manner. Completely different strategy. They found it hopeless to work together. I think this kind of thing is quite familiar in our cognitive lives. So we've tried to listen to what people do when they're remembering the past together and try to code, try to quantify, to understand what are the processes by which collaboration sometimes helps and sometimes hinders us. So these are the key factors that are useful and not useful. In favor of collaborating well, a good thing is when you're cueing each other. This is not rocket science, it's obvious. You just throw something out. Who was that person who was the pilot? Or who did we meet on the bus that day? Even if the cue isn't picked up, even if your partner or your collaborator doesn't actually get it, it's a sign that you're working well together. So even if they're unsuccessful cues. And secondly, repetition. And this was surprising to us. You know, when you get the answer right, you say Diana, and your partner says, yes, Diana. That's a sign that collaboration is working well. Right? You're just, in a sense, on the same page, encouraging each other. In contrast, just here, factor 3, the things that don't work well, the things that are a sign of trouble for a collaborating couple or other groups, where you disagree about strategies like alphabetical versus going around the room, where you correct each other. So if I say Diana and you say, no, she's not in that club, that's a bad sign. Now, we have found some different results on that with siblings. We've done a lot of the same work with siblings, and siblings can correct each other till the cows come home, and it's a good thing for siblings. Whereas if couples correct each other, they tend to be couples who actually don't collaborate well together. So what we think is going on there, you've got no choice about your siblings, you're stuck with them. Whereas when your partner, when your romantic partner corrects you, that's much more emotionally troubling, right? much harder to deal with, harder to come back from. And the final factor that's a problem is nominating an expert. Or you're the one who knows all about that club, you do it. And obviously collaboration is not really happening. We're also trying to take this work into some applied areas that might help dementia research down the track to ask, well, can we overturn some of the ways that older adults' memories start to fade or decline? And especially we find that older adults, when they're talking about the past together, produce much richer detail, sensory detail, vivid, perceptual and emotional detail. So kind of going episodic, they tell you about the episodes in particular. And so this second last part of the talk, I just want to sum up by saying all of the research on this field now, I guess in the last 15 years that we've been doing it, not just us, lots of other people too, has tried to look at much more fine-grained detail in the way that people interact together, the way that people communicate in talking about the past together. Shared history can help. You need to know a lot about each other. But that's not enough. Some people, like in the office or in other teams, they know a lot about each other, and it still doesn't really help them. They don't successfully collaborate. So I just want to just list a couple of other topics. I'm just going to put these up on screen as we move to the end of the talk that we're interested in coming out of this research. I guess it's taking us into studies of other emotional forms of kind of interdependence in relationships. And looking at the way that aging, especially in aged care homes, needs collaborative support to people, so people can keep their memories sort of alive, even when they've lost some of their friends and family. And the last thing I just want to finish with is about a new set of works, the last set of topics, where we were lucky enough to get to piggyback on a big medical study, a biomedical study that's one of the flagships in Australia for where they're trying to find markers that might indicate the potential for Alzheimer's or other dementias down the track. This is a huge study based in Melbourne, but with people all over Australia. 1,100 volunteers do tests, all kinds of neural and biological tests every 18 months. What they hadn't realised until we came along and got involved is that among this 1,100 people were 47 couples. So these are all older people. And we said, hang on, there are 47 couples, so we actually 39 of the couples agreed to work with us, aged between 68 and 90 years old, who've been together, most of them, for 50 or 60 years. All of these were not people suffering from either dementia or mild cognitive impairment, so these are healthy, control, older people who are in this study going through this battery of tests. And here's the similar kind of design we use. So initially we'll do a set of individual memory tasks with each of them. Then we'll come back to their home, we work in their homes a week later, and we'll do the same task collaboratively. There'll be a collaborative group. And then 2 years later we came back again and did pretty much the same batch of tasks as a collaboration to see if we got the same results, if the positives or negatives of collaboration were kind of stable. So this is just striking results where we're showing that people who know each other so well, when they're doing memory tasks that matter to them, that they care about, actually they often do benefit very strongly from collaboration. This is quite, I hope, quite an easy thing to see. What we're looking at is the difference between the top numbers and the second number. Top number is recall 1 as the nominal group, the two of them working separately. Recall 2 is collaborative a week later. The collaborative score when they're remembering the European countries they've been to is typically much higher, and when they're remembering the names of their mutual friends, it's a lot higher when they're working together. We came back 2 years later and we found pretty much the same advantage, not just collaborative inhibition, not just that they're not doing badly, but they're actually doing well from collaboration. So here, the second line is recall 2, the third line is 2 years later. If we don't get any result for lists of words, that's boring. Why would collaboration help? But when they're remembering European countries, collaboration is better than individual recall, and especially again with mutual friends, collaboration even 2 years later is a lot better than their individual recall. And the last one I'll finish with is just a kind of twist we've been doing on this experimental research with the older couples. So that's just showing we found the same factors being associated with positive and negative performance. But what we've also done is add an anthropologist and ethnographer to this experimental task. This is Kath sitting off at the corner here. She's got 2 video cameras watching the experiment and taking the experiment and the psychologists as part of the object of study, as well as the older couple who here are sitting on the couch doing their memory tests. And we thought, this is a really odd situation. Let's actually study what's happening in this experimental environment. And in particular, we were interested in what might not be captured by our recordings of what older couples say to each other. All of this work is based on transcripts of words. And so, in this case, this older couple are sitting next to each other on the couch. It's not just about what they say to each other. They're touching each other, they're constantly looking at each other, they're laughing. And when we use video and enrich the kind of analysis to include that kind of embodied interaction, also where they're looking, this was a task that happened just after the American presidential elections. The TV is actually off here, and when they were asked to name all the American states they could, they were constantly looking at the TV and said, I remember last week, the states were up there on the map, and so I can kind of see them on the screen, even though the TV was off. We wouldn't catch that analysis in our normal scientific method. So, we're taking a kind of reverse angle to try to add this embodied, this real life dimension to study remembering in the wild in these older couples. So to finish, again, these are just the same questions that I would be interested to hear from you in Q&A. What cognitive tasks do you like to work together in a group or team? And when we come to memory, what do you remember with other people? When and why? For what purpose? Especially, when do you remember the past together? Is it always fun? Can it be trouble? Do you think you do better collaborating than thinking about it individually? Thank you very much for your attention. It's been really nice and looking forward to hearing your reactions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We're going to take a couple of minutes in the room, so come back at 10:02 by the clock. We're just past, actually. Let's make it about 2 or 3 minutes. That would be perfect. Thank you, guys. Lovely. Okay. Let me come back here a bit so I'm a bit more visible. So we're going to start the discussion, Q&A, whatever you want to call it. Just saying that I've put a bit of draft into the room because it is getting a bit hot for anyone standing. But if it starts swinging the slides around a lot, I might just close it. So we'll see. So we'll talk to people in the room, particularly, if they want to. I had a question for the memory expert, really.
Great.
I have real difficulty with time since the pandemic.
Yes.
So I remember things. I know they were before the pandemic, but my idea was it 1 year before or 10 years before gets very collapsed. Have you got any insight, and will it ever get better?
Lots of people are studying this, of course, and I guess it's generally agreed that we were all disoriented in time, and for many of us still so. And it can be quite confusing. I don't know what it's like for you. You can feel both that time slowed down, like it took ages for things to happen, but also that it's sort of, I mean, looking back now, it's been sped up because nothing happened, in a sense, over that period. So we're all still, as with practical arrangements, coming out to see a talk is still a different thing from what it was before. We're all getting used to time passing at its normal pace again. I think we also, more relevant to tonight's topic, we got used to managing alone or with our core family members than we have normally, and so because we didn't tend to see and chat, chew the cud with our friends, with our work colleagues about funny things that had happened, maybe we were thrown back on our own resources a bit more cognitively and emotionally than we had been, than we used to be. And I think, again, we're still getting used to, I mean, now I guess you're getting used to, you know, seeing other people having a coffee again. It's normal, but we're not in the midst of it like we were. So there's a lot of science being done on this, and some is better than others.
It's interesting because I think I had a different experience from most of them. We had to try to run the university and the colleges fairly early. We were sent back students much earlier than most people came out of lockdown because it was considered so important for them. And so there was a constant pressure to reinvent the wheel, and you were talking about general collaboration earlier. By God, it exposed who's good at that and who isn't. It really did, because we were doing it under time pressure. You had, you know, a matter of hours from Boris announcing something, which came out of thin blue air, to the higher education department wanting to push it down to the lower, both to schools and to and further education, but also to higher education, universities and colleges. And you then suddenly had to implement and revise something completely. And now, remembering that, I have no idea whether something happened in March 2020 or June 2022, because it's all one big nightmare. Anyway, would anybody else in the room like to suggest anything? Yep.
Hello, thank you for your talk, it's really interesting. I just had a question about the collaborative recall that you did. I was wondering, was there any information regarding the gender balance? Because I'm assuming maybe, perhaps, if there was more men, then they would kind of argue over each other, and perhaps how correct they were in recalling those facts may be a bit lower if perhaps there was a greater percentage of women. Just curious.
Great question. A couple of things to say about that. It's spot on. What I didn't say about the studies we were reporting with the older couples is that these were all heterosexual couples, older couples, also very middle-class couples. This kind of work needs to be done with a much more diverse kind of group. But within that population of participants, some very clear gender differences, perhaps along the lines that you would expect. So, for example, we would often see patterns in which, when they got together to collaborate in some memory task, the husband, the man, would be much more confident, would, for example, start off with a head full of steam and not be receptive to the woman's input until he ran out of steam. And at that point, he would give up and hand it over when it was kind of a little bit too late. So that is the disruption of individual retrieval strategies, the classic explanation. So that's what happens. One example of what happens when things are not working well from a collaborative point of view. Of course, On the other hand, there are many couples in which even, I mean, that's a kind of extreme caricature of gendered relations in memory. But even when it is something like that extreme, sometimes it's okay, right? There can be all kinds of divisions of labour. If they both know each other well enough, of course you're the kind of person who would try to remember all of the states of America by working down the East Coast. So it's no use for me to say, oh, Wisconsin and Montana, because you haven't got there yet. So we had a case where the wife kind of knew a lot about that, but she was willing to wait, let him go, and then feed in her stuff. So I think, again, that's not too surprising that women carry a lot of the burden and have to do some of the organising work. And maybe I can say one more thing about that. In more recent work, we've been looking at the way in which older couples are using technologies, for example, to remember their appointments and so on. And we'd ask the men and women separately, so, you know, in your relationship, how much do you use digital technologies? You know, is it something you really rely on? And the men would typically say, no. This is, of course, also a certain generation. The men would say, no, not at all. You know, don't know how to use that stuff. Oh, but she has the organizer, and she's always with me, so that's how we work. So again, the woman's sort of at the base of the memory process. When we, I think, start doing the same experiments with younger couples who are maybe where there's more ease with digital technologies, we might see some different results. But I'd be interested, like, if you have any ideas about the kind of things to study with gender and memory, that would be good to know. Thank you.
Catch my eye if you want to say anything else. So online, I've got an interesting one. Somebody's saying, did you find a lot of disagreement? And she says, my son, daughter and myself don't remember events the same way. Is this common? I think there are two bits to unpick here. There's remembering different things about an event, which is more about what you observe. But actually, I very much sympathise with this person because my sister and I are complete opposites. We will end up thinking that both, you know, that the other one is wrong and that something didn't happen or did happen or
yes.
It was different. So I just now accept she's got a better memory than me because the tiny number of times we've been able to prove it, she's been right. But most of the time it's about things nobody else remembers.
Right, so there's no independent evidence, right. Right, so that fits with the point about siblings kind of disagreeing quite a lot and that corrections are actually not necessarily a bad sign. So I don't know about your case, but it's actually, I would take it as a sign of a robust relationship that you know you can actually push back and say, no, it wasn't like that. But yes, more generally, of course, there's often deep disagreement about the two things, about both what actually happened, where it's incredibly common for people to just have encoded something different, and where the things can be completely incompatible. They can't both be right. And I was just saying during the break, one example of this can be when you ask a couple that you know, so how did you get together? And you often get quite different stories from the two partners. Now, I think what's really interesting there is not that there's different stories. That's kind of normal, like, you know, or you never remember that we met at that party, you know, but you know, we were both there and we talked even though whatever. But what matters is whether you're okay with that disagreement, with that difference of opinion and memory. Some people will say, yeah, we agree to differ, you know, she doesn't remember that, and I think it happened this way. But other times, it's like, no, you know, I'm the one who's right, kind of thing, and that can cause more trouble. So the second kind of difference is not just about what really happened, it's about the meaning of what happened, the kind of thing that often is you know, difficult in court, where witnesses are meant to stick to the facts and nothing but the facts. The whole truth and nothing but the truth is a very high bar, and not offer their interpretation. But in emotional life and in social life, one of the reasons we talk about the past is because we want to know the meaning of the experiences we went through together and how they have affected and influenced our lives till now. And that's where I think you don't get to be a couple who's been together for 40 or 50 years without having come to accept your differences from each other.
Okay, I'm going to pick up, because you talked about the justice system a little bit in the talk as well. So the process, on the sticky bit, the process where he is being interviewed in court, that's better, is actually quite akin to when they're being interviewed by the police for the first time as a witness. except that the police have this kind of flexibility to go off in a direction which something's been suggested, to read the body language and go, you just remember something, haven't you, what else was it? Because they're asking about things that they've been trained to use as prompts. You know, what did things sound like? You know, did you know if anybody else was there? Things that perhaps if you're trying to tell a story you don't imagine you yourself thinking about. Does that mean that in the justice system that most countries use, we're missing a trick? Because barristers, whether for the prosecution or defence, very often have a massive agenda and they don't want to be sidetracked, but actually the very fact of talking to somebody about it in open court might prompt another memory which they want to speak about.
Are you thinking of the chance of actually finding some new access to a bit of the past? Right, I guess that can happen. I mean, I think it's possibly quite rare because typically the story has been rehearsed at least as an individual, right, with your lawyers or with whatever the legal system is. And I mean, I was listening to the discussions about the Trump case this afternoon. I mean, it's interesting about people's assumptions about, well, how much detail is appropriate, and so sometimes it can seem that providing a lot of detail is a sign of the witness's credibility. Other times, some people might think, well, that's a sign that they've made more up. So typically, the only way to resolve that is to look back at what the previous statements have been and to try to track consistency over time. And the work that we've done that I guess is closest to that is in a very different context of hearings for assessing the claims of asylum seekers. So in Australia, as you may know, we've had a very punitive and brutal policy on asylum seekers for many years, where even when they eventually get to the stage of having their stories heard, if they are telling in a public hearing a narrative about how, for example, they had to flee from their home country for certain reasons, if they give a slightly different detail in that story in court from what they told the border authorities when they first arrived in Australia, that's taken as evidence that they're making it all up. If you can't tell the precisely identical story, you are fabricating it. So this is where psychologists have a really important role to go to say, memory doesn't work like that. It's not a video recorder. It's not perfect. This is normal. If they told you the exact same story, that would actually be a cause for suspicion, right? You've got to allow for some fluidity and flexibility.
Not to mention shock. If you generally had to flee your country, there's all that. So we've got one online. So I think if I got this right, it's missing a couple of letters. Arrangements that can help I don't know if it means strangers, presumably newcomers in care homes, be more harmonised, also have private conversations with one or several people. They hope the research enables better groupings, that in the future care homes are designed to kind of enable more control over the ambience, to help people settle in. So, interesting.
Absolutely, great point and great question. And I'd be interested, many of you may have had experiences with relatives in care homes. My colleague Celia Harris, who led a lot of this research, is now working with aged care facilities in Australia. The systems are stretched, right, so terribly, and staff are often fabulous people under intense pressure. So we need ways of relatively easy, time-sensitive ways of helping people, especially where they've lost members of their family and they are more on their own and struggling often with their memory than they have. How can we keep them connected to their past a little bit, because that is emotionally important. Some obvious things, everybody knows this. Let's help them create an environment that has some objects, some photos, some artifacts, if that's what they want. But then training care staff, when you're doing something else, when you're just spending time looking after an older person or in a collective scenario, you were telling me about something the other day. The person may not actually remember now, but you can recreate an environment in which telling tales about the past might be safe, it might be useful, it might be beneficial to the person. So just small things to add to, I guess we'd call it the scaffolding, like what can older people lean on to keep the mind, the emotion and the memory alive, kind of warm and supportive, even where both the brain and the world are starting to crumble around them. It's really hard, but I mean, we're all going to be in it. If we're lucky, right?
Just coming here.
So, over the last 3 months, we've been a good couple for an experiment. So we're very, we know what we do all the time now because we've got a timeline on the phone.
Yep.
We count the number of steps. We're very keen on photography, so digital photography for the last 20 years. GPS readings on it, everything. We know everything. Okay, so now, 3 months ago, you get out negatives from the past, film negatives, 35-year-old, and scan them, and you can scan about 100 negatives a day, so that you get 36 in a film. You used to get 36 in a film, so you get 2 or 3 films a day. And if you weren't organised in the past, then they're random. You've got no idea of the date.
Yeah.
All that you know is you've got 36 one after the other,
Yeah.
and sometimes you can't even believe that. You don't know what country they're in, whether you're together or apart, and it just 2 or 3 to 4 times a day we're coming across memories which, did this happen? Who was that? Who was that? Yeah, and it just it's bizarre.
Yeah. I mean,
So your experiment, what you need to do is go to the scanning companies, see who's coming in with 35-year-old negatives, wanting to scan them, and they'd be great for an experiment.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I guess I'm impressed with the motivation because I think a lot of us kind of lose the urge after a little while for exactly the reasons that you give, that it's so hard to place particular random images in a timeline. You've got to use clues and cues. On the other hand, I mean, it sounds like it's fun, right? So most of the time it's reminding you of interesting, if not pleasurable things. I mean, the digital records, I guess there's a passion for what's sometimes called life logging now, of using that stuff from the past, turning it into more easily accessible, tagged and categorized forms of digital records. And I guess one of the things that people are studying now is, well, what do people do with those records once they've got them? If you've been keeping your system, your photos well categorized, not many of us do, but some people do over the years, do you go back and look at them? What might be alternative kind of design ways to display the photographs? So, I mean, so what are you doing with them once you've worked out what they're from? Are you just leaving them back in a folder?
Probably like I do with the thousands of photographs I take every week now. I think one of the main things, and I've always thought this, and I suppose going back to university, in textbooks and that, I used to read something and write a ring around it in a paragraph and that. Not that I was ever going to go back to it, it's just the fact that that was enforcing my memory. Yeah. And I've often thought that I seldom look at photographs. It's actually the taking of a photograph that reinforces the memory at the time and is a pleasurable experience capturing that moment in my mind.
Absolutely. And I think maybe that was more common in the days of film photography when you had to take care because you had a limited number of photographs, and so now when you can shoot off 1 million, it's maybe more common, and kids don't, it's not such a big deal for them. But have you actually discovered many things that you'd completely forgotten by working through this?
Yes, I mean there was this fascinating scene in the playground, a beautiful sculpture thing, and it's our children when they're 8, 10, so they're very recognisable, and it clearly us took it. And I've got no recollection of it at all. Sort of like neither of us have. And
I mean, I think
it's a lovely photograph.
I think, both photographs and other technologies can be little islands in a long sea of oblivion. I mean, really, very little of long lives needs to be recalled. Right? So because you haven't been reviewing these photographs in that whole period, it's like. It's a new mode of access to the past. So yeah, fascinating.
Yeah. I suppose the other thing is that even if you don't fully understand the story, it helps you move on to the story, and then of course with Google Lens you can sort of look up where it was in things like this in the world.
There's no end to this,
So I was sort of like on a little seaplane and that. You know, it's just fantastic being able to sort of like, oh, it's got the plane number, so I can look up the plane number where it was 30 years ago, and it was just fantastic.
Yeah, thank you.
That's slightly frightening. I'm just going to say to the people in the room and online, the last speaker's comments, while he was making them, the look on his wife's face is absolutely priceless. A little bit of oversharing going on, maybe. It's rather good. So, somebody online says, an interesting lecture and concept, thank you. It makes me wonder why we elevate individual IQ without a corresponding interest in collaborative IQ. If individual IQ is called IQ, then perhaps John would like to develop a test for collaborative IQ, for group intelligence, when people put their minds together. Maybe call it CIQ or WeQ. Needs to have a higher kudos was the thrust of the argument.
Great, absolutely, and people absolutely do this. I've just forgotten what label is used. I think CQ for collective intelligence quotient. It's I can give the main people who've studied it, Anita Woolley and Tom Malone at MIT. And actually, I mean, what they're studying is not memory. It's a slightly different sort of process about solving puzzles together. So it's another interesting aspect of collective cognition. But their highlight result. I mean, it's a great research group, they've done lots of things, but they say, okay, you're interested in say you're going to put together a group to do some puzzles, and it can be a whole range of different types of puzzles. What's the one best thing to include in the group? What kind of person do we need? And they think, well, you might come up with all kinds of complex things about balanced movement, but actually it's quite simple. The more women you have, the better. And it's not quite as simple as that. It's that empathy is the single crucial factor because you can listen to each other. And in general, in our culture, in the West at least, empathy typically is more heavily associated with women. So to answer the question online, I mean, look, we haven't quite wanted to quantify success and failure in collaborative memory in quite the same way that they're doing. So they're working on puzzles, as I said, and decision making where there is a clear answer. In the case of memory of your personal past, it's not quite like there's one right way to do it. We're not sort of scoring couples against a standard for accuracy. We don't know what really happened back on their honeymoon, and what we care about is more about what memory is doing for the couples now in the present. What function is it playing, and how do they work together? So what's the emotional and the cognitive kind of point? What's the function of remembering together in the present? I think there's a question at the back there.
Hi, I'm a teacher, so I wondered what this means for classroom teachers. There's often quite a drive to try and get students to do revision activities together, but this might imply that unless they really like each other, that might not be a good idea.
Yeah, great question. I mean, it's not something I've studied myself, so I mean, I'm curious to know just about your experience. Certainly, I think in our culture, there's too much trust in group activities being automatically a good thing. Now, in education, I reckon some of the reason for that is not so much that people actually believe it is good for the kids' education, but that it's a social process. Or even learning to work with other people who you don't particularly like is an important skill. When you're asked to work together in a group, for instance, for academics or in another professional context, I think often we're grumpy old buggers, and I often will just kind of refuse to engage if I'm told to do a group activity to come up with a new brand for my university or something like that. I just don't care. But kids in general, you imagine, well, they tend to put their best foot forward, don't they? And I mean, well, I'd be interested to know your feelings about this. I mean, do they just shut off? Of course, some kids are more communicative than others, and so the ones who contribute more can dominate, which is a problem in some group process.
Yeah, I definitely find that a problem. I think for some students they love it, and then you always get the people that just end up doing nothing for the lesson.
Yeah.
Sorry, also a teacher. Yeah. I also find it depends on whether you've let them choose their groups or not. Because if you choose who they're going to be in a group with, the expectation is they have to get on and do it, and then they do. But if you've given any hint at all that you're going to let them choose their groups,
then they hold out for that. And if they get put with someone they don't like, then they just don't do anything. So don't show no weakness. They are not choosing their groups.
But is the problem there, if they do choose the group, that they just work with their mates and they're chatting about other things, or not? It's not that. It's that it's about you giving them a task that they have to fulfil.
I think that if they end up with their friends, they can not do the task if they want to. Yes, I think if you put them in groups, the expectation is that they're going to do the task. Yeah.
Okay.
And they're maybe not secure enough to not do the task in front of.
Look, I guess the only thing I would say about this is that in group cognitive activities of all kinds, I mean, what's really hard is to get at what expertise or knowledge all of the group members have. And so what you're talking about there, where one person may end up just really quiet, and this is true in professional and brainstorming groups too. Often it might be the most junior member of a team who stays quiet because he or she doesn't want to take a risk in speaking out or saying something out of turn. And for kids as well. If perhaps there's an opportunity to make that a point, make it a theme, right? To say, look, when you're working in a group of 5 or whatever, it's quite likely, I mean, kids know this deeply, it's quite likely that 1 or 2 people will dominate the conversation. Part of the process might be seeing if all 5 of you have something to contribute to the process, and that is in itself is a challenge. Some groups can do that better than others, and I think, I mean, often, I mean, a lot of kids take some pride, right, in having some social skills as well, to be able to say, yeah, we all contributed to this answer. Yeah.
I was just remembering something on a teacher training course, and it was the most successful group I've ever worked in, and it was a huge group, like 8 or 9 teachers, and we worked. I think we had to plan like a marketing something, something wasn't really our thing, and we'd all sort of sat down and go, oh, we've got to do this, and we had this one woman in our group who was sort of enthusiastic but not in a threatening way. She just whipped us all through it. We had a great time, and we finished 20 minutes early, went and had a drink or something, came back, presented. We genuinely had a great time and did it in super fast speed and did it well, but it was all down to that one person and her influence on the group.
So would you say that's just a kind of natural collaborator in some way, somebody who's just got a knack?
I suppose just the idea that there's that some people dominate and make the group do worse, but then there are other people who enable the group to do really well. Like the effect of an individual on the group is not always negative.
Absolutely right, and if part of the process can be facilitating input from other people, that's right. So, and I think there are, I mean, in areas like this, in decision making and creativity, I think some people just are slightly better than others at collaborating. It's not so much about are you good at memory or decision making or design or whatever. You just have that knack for opening up a space for listening to other people. I mean, the other work we've done on sport, of course, there's a lot of debate about how you turn a team of experts, like a team of individual experts, 11 great players in some sport, into an expert team. And often classic cases in which a team of people who have not been that great individually have managed to outperform, to win competitions, to win games against people. So there it's well accepted, right, that the collaboration is it's an independent thing. The best individuals are not necessarily the best collaborators, and I think this is a lesson to bring back to education as well. There can be really, really bright people, I think we all know this, really, really bright people who actually can't work very well with others.
Have you tried any experiments with experts where you're trying to get experts to work better together? Because I just wondered, because I think where we work now, lots of very talented colleagues, and the thing is that when we're in a group, so you sort of trust everyone else in the group that their ideas are good too, and I find it much easier to not push my opinion because I'm like, oh, my colleagues are also really good, so their ideas are really good too. And so something like a protocol where half of every time you want to say something, you let it go.
Great.
Like, could you have an algorithm like that to make a group of experts work better?
Yeah, there are lots of sort of five rules for good teamwork. I mean, things like teams in the Air Force or whatever often have these kinds of things when they change and some are better than others. I mean, one one that I quite like for a lot of team processes is let the most junior people speak first. Not give them the option. They have to speak first, so that they get to say what they do before the senior people come through. That has challenges too, because then they're on the spot too. But yes, you do often need to instill some more or less automatic processes, which you then hope will become natural or habitual, but it can take a while to get there.
Thank you very much.
Sort of related is years and years ago we talked about well-being management theory, which is sort of, I don't know how intellectually respected, but essentially you have different character types, like a load of Lego bricks put together, because if you have ordinary people together, they produce average time answer. Experts either get it really fast, or they spend all their time arguing and never finish.
Right. I mean, a couple of things about that. Yeah, I mean, certainly a lot of the work on transactive memory theory has been in organisation and management, where people are looking for a quick fix about how you create a team, and it's difficult because so much of it is about knowing each other and working well together. But the other point about that is about, depends on the task, right? If what you're doing together is a very focused single task, you may want 3, 4, 5 people who all have the same skills, who can kind of add to each other's capacities. Much more commonly, the tasks are much less well defined. The team is doing many different things over the course of a day or a week or a job sequence. So you need people with different skills. And so, in a sense, one of the things I didn't talk about today is the notion of division of labour, which I think is really important for teamwork and in relationships as well. So the whole point here is very often it's not a good idea to have people who are the same in the relevant respects in the group. You need people who are different. In the case of memory, it might be that, well, I'm the one who remembers stuff about our holidays, you're the one who remembers stuff about the finances or the cars or how to fix the house or whatever. And that's a source of strength, right? So that you can complement each other. I have these skills, you have these skills. Same in a lot of professional groups. I think this is a well-established principle in a lot of management and organizational psychology, that the more you can make sure that all of the bases are covered, that's another cliche that they use, you're not overlapping, you're not duplicating, you don't have redundant skills, you've got to have people who know what each other can do, so you know where to channel the question or to direct the problem, and then so, I mean, a tagline for this is like, difference makes success. Having different people involved in a group makes a more successful team.
Thank you. Somebody online actually gave a bit of a better answer to the legal question, which is that, of course, in court, a defendant can only pass witness paper to their barrister. They can't themselves question the witness, nor can the jury. It's a theatrical act, which we perhaps ought to remember this week.
Good.
And it's adversarial, not inquisition, which would actually be better for establishing the facts. Though, of course, some European countries don't do jury trials and have an inquisitor judge who sets about establishing in a kind of detective-like fashion what they think happened. And he's saying, or she's saying, the best actor wins, regardless of what actually happened. And then years later somebody says, oh, if only someone had asked that question. Fair enough, that sounds like the voice of experience. I want to go back to something you just mentioned right at the very beginning, before you were coming on to recall, which is wayfinding. And that is an interesting one. It's probably one of the areas where there are the most arguments. But also, many years ago, when we first started this event, we had a very well-known professor down here from Oxford, who's Paul Newman, Professor of Robotics, come and talk about Marge, his robot. She turned up. Marge stands about this high and has a blue head. Yeah. And she gets taken out for a trundle around Keble and St John's and Broad Street and Wadham every single month. And she's trying to learn how to find where she is on the route. So they start her somewhere different every time. And it's an interesting one. We're trying to get robots to mimic human things. Does this business of how we collaborate, is there anything that they could learn from that or not?
So is part of Marge's task is a navigational capacity?
It's navigation, but the problem is humans are really good at when you set down on a route that you've got the map of in your head, you know where you are to start with. Robots can't do it very well.
Yeah. That's a really good question. There may well be some work on collaboration and robotics. There's lots of stuff going on here. I guess right, so what's challenging for us, of course, is to map a kind of more egocentric perspective. I can see where I am ahead of me onto some more map-like allocentric perspective where you're looking, in a sense, looking from a bird's eye view. And I think that same challenge is there in robotics too. That you often need some input from the external world, maybe from a sign or from somebody else, maybe, or from another robot, to say, how the map relates to where you are is like this. That's the challenge. I think certainly we learn a lot about our environments from other people, and that over time it's not just a matter of you as a individual brain battling your way to build up a more detailed cognitive map of the city, but you remember and you learn your spatial skills partly through having done things with people around the place. It was with that friend that I went to Hackney first, or whatever it happens to be. So it's part of the challenge of giving robots a social life, which I think a lot of people are involved in, to say, well, it's not just a matter of having kind of a pre-programmed goal to which I work out the best means, but of acknowledging other perspectives on the same place or skills. So there's a Google search I could do tomorrow to check. I bet they're working on it. I bet there's collaborative robotic wayfinding research in Oxford.
So does that mean that you think different perspectives of, say, an incident that happened some time ago actually, properly help us remember?
Absolutely, yeah. And both different perspectives you have yourself from different periods of your life or different points in time, but we rely on other people to give us a different take on things, and that's true for memories of the past. It's true for places. I know that my partner knows a city better than I do, so we need to work together. Or emotions as well. You just say, well, I'm well aware that I can sometimes get things wrong, and I can misunderstand what was happening there, and I'd better not rely on my own narrow perspective. So yeah, I guess the theoretical view about socially distributed cognition is really one that says, we're not most human, we're not most ourselves when we're sitting in an armchair thinking about God or philosophy or numbers or Donald Trump, right? We're most human, we're our agents, we're autonomous when we are engaged in rich social interaction with each other, nutting out a problem, arguing about the meaning of something, politics, TV. So it's, this is what our species does. We are good at cooperation, collaboration, we fight too, but that's part of the same process. So it's about getting psychology and neuroscience out of the head to see the brain as one part of a really complicated ecology that includes places and especially people, rather than everything being driven by the inside.
So this is another idea for research. So traditionally, software development is done by, you have a team, say 7 people. One of them you call the manager or the team leader, and he says, basically, in 18 months' time we're going to have this done, and we're going to get there by doing this in 12 months, and this is 6 months, and here's a big PERT diagram how to do it, now go and do it. There's a type of development called agile development, and one of the methods is it's called Scrum, where basically you put the people together and you call one of them the Scrum leader, and the Scrum leader, his job is to facilitate. So he doesn't tell them what to do, they work out what to do, they work out where they're going to be in 12 months' time, and so his job is to make sure they've got whiteboards, flip charts, so he's not a labourer, so he's still sort of paid perhaps maybe more than them or similar, but he is definitely called a facilitator, and he facilitates the brainstorming and things like that. But it strikes me that would be great to do research on. And it's called Scrum, of course, because of UK rugby, where they have scrum downs and sort of like, and it's very much sort of like, well, actually that's sort of like our Scrum works. You have a leader of the Scrum, so that's how they got onto the term.
Is there a leader so much in a Scrum? But there's certainly different roles in a Scrum, some doing the heavy lifting and others. So yeah, I mean, facilitation, and I mean, it's like the question we had earlier about some people are good at doing that, who may not necessarily be the ones who have the component skills themselves, but yeah, I think that's right. So each domain of professions or teamworks tends to have some shared history and experience that they've worked out a pattern like this to create a system that will work for them.
Just thinking again about what you're saying about how the couples cue each other.
Yeah.
And so it seems like one of them is providing the key to the indexes into the memory in the other person's brain.
Yeah.
So the other person had the information but wasn't able to index into it. So it seems like a brain is capable of storing more information than it can successfully index.
Oh, yeah.
So is that a design flaw, or is it that we've evolved to be able to store more information than we can index because we've got other people to provide additional indexes? Would you consider that to be an evolutionary thing?
That's an absolutely great point. Yes, on both counts. So point one, that I think the individual brain is already doing that without other people being there. So we think of the relationship between different brain parts as one. The cortex is more of the storage system. The hippocampus is more an indexing or labeling system that points to where in the cortex the traces are stored. So other people are in a sense playing the same role as another part of the brain can play. And then yes, absolutely. I think it's a real puzzle about why rich memory of this kind that we're talking about evolved. It's not obvious why we need to know what happened on one specific Friday afternoon in 1988 compared to all the Friday afternoons in the 80s, because what matters for future reference is just how things generally go. You need to know facts about how the world works. You don't need to know what somebody said to me on that one particular occasion. So a strong line of thought about the evolution of memory is that retaining those specific past events was for social purposes, that it's to build trust and to resolve disagreements, to encourage collaboration and cooperation between people, where the information about specific things that happened might often have been shared, and that only by talking to each other can you actually pick it up and access it. So at the general evolutionary point there is that it's a skill, it's an adaptation perhaps, which was initially shared between people that we've then kind of internalized, so the single brain can do it. Now, I guess, in a much more interconnected world, we are learning again to rely on other people more than we have before. So really love that point.
This one's for John because he's not been in the UK much in the last 20 years. One of the most interesting programmes, personally, I think, on Radio 4 is The Reunion, where the interviewer brings back together about 8 people usually, who've been usually in different roles in the same event. So it can be good, it can be bad, it can be an emergency. The one this week was, the London Olympics, and you can hear them triggering off each other extra things they may not have thought to say when they were kind of thinking, what would I like to say when we start talking? And it is a conversation, it's not just a straight interview, although they begin by kind of going around the group. But it's really, really fascinating. And in the case of big tragic events or difficult events to cope with, where you get people from all different sides of what happened, really interesting, because it's kind of an active memory exercise. But I've been thinking about it a bit while we've been doing this. Okay, I'm just going to have a quick check online. I don't think we've got any other questions in there. So that means we're going to wrap up now. Do come and talk to John while Zoe and I are clearing up, because he doesn't know where everything goes. So that'll keep him occupied. So obviously the usual thanks to Pharmacology, this time to the Leverhulme Institute for helping fund John's stay here. Thank you very much, Zoe, my main helper at the moment. Fantastic. She's back to do lots of hard work as well. Good. Looking ahead, we are going to go back to our usual, so this was just a bit of an aberration. Actually, it worked quite well in terms of where the dates fall, so we didn't have a big break or a short break. So we're then back on the second Tuesday of June and of July, and for those who are new to this, we don't do one in August, because in the very first year, some regulars said, please don't hold one, we would miss it. Back then we weren't recording. The recordings go up on a private YouTube playlist, so that those go out on the mailing list, so if you haven't joined, you're very welcome to. June's one is going to be Dan Romeni, who some of the regulars will remember from last year, coming back to have another go at how much AI has changed since he last taught, which is, he keeps revising what he'd like me to put in his précis, so it hasn't come out yet. And then I've been angling for this for several months. We've got a group actually from Earthwatch, but we're involved in setting up the UK's first tiny forest in Whitney, and there's now one right in Oxford, and they're definitely going to come in July. So tiny forests are probably no bigger than this room, and they have thousands of species planted densely together. Got some nods around the room, somebody knows about it. So anyway, that's our July one, and then we'll take a break, and then we're back in September. Thanks to everyone for coming, thanks to those who are online, and biggest thanks of all, please to John for being the speaker.